Hi, this is Jennifer with Summa Counseling, and we are now in our last stage of writing the college personal statement, which is the revision process. So, revision is two stages. The first one is a very high level editing, and we call it bird's eye view editing, and we'll be talking about that first. So, the first question you need to ask yourself when you take a step back from your first draft is whether you feel like your essay could possibly have been written by someone else. If you trade out the names of the people in the essay, the school names, and possibly the city names, is the storyline a predictable or common one? Secondly, you want to ask if the essay sounds like you. Read it out loud. That is one of the best exercises to see if you feel like the essay has captured your personality. And as an exercise, I'd like you to pause the video for a couple minutes and read this excerpt called Temperance Basketball. Now, after reading this excerpt, you probably figured out that this writing could very possibly have been produced by hundreds, if not thousands, of other students. There are no real distinctive details about the paragraph. They simply describe part of being a team, and they describe a lot of the common elements of playing basketball. So, as a college essay, it's not all that successful. So, keep in mind when you're revising, your rough draft should sound unique, should not sound like it could have been written by many other students, and it should also capture the nuances of your personality. It should sound like you if you read it to a good friend. Um, in fact, if you share it with someone who knows you well, who might not know who wrote it, a successful essay would be one in which that reader would say, "Oh, I know exactly who the author was because nobody else could have written this essay." That would be a job well done. Now, next, we want to check the logical flow of your ideas in your essay. Your essay, starting from the beginning to the end, should flow clearly and logically from one point to the next. And to make sure if this is true, you can try a very short exercise, which is to write out the first line of every paragraph. And if those first lines flow naturally and sound like a mini story in and of itself, then you know you've done a good job with the logical flow of your essay. You should also ask yourself, does the order of your paragraphs make sense? Would it make more sense to swap any of the paragraphs, to bring some of the later points earlier in the essay, or take some of the earlier points and move them later? So this is where you really want to think about your essay as a whole. Now, if you're satisfied having gone through all those steps, you are ready to move on to the very last stage of editing, which we call close editing. And at this point, you should have gotten a lot of feedback on your rough draft already, because once you enter close editing, it is the point of no return, basically. You do not want to abandon an essay draft once you have closely edited it, because by then you will have invested so much time, it would be a big waste of effort for both yourself and your counselor. So, before you actually start closely editing, make sure you have teachers, family members, friends, whoever you trust. Ask them to read your essay and give you their honest opinion. And if you're looking for a certain kind of feedback, make sure you specify that. Ask them, do you feel my topic is unique? believable, impactful, how strong is the introduction, the development of the ideas, the conclusion, does my essay sound like me? Would you have thought of me if you didn't know who the author was? And finally, once you receive all this feedback, make sure you filter through it with your own lens. Keep in mind that feedback is going to be highly subjective. It's even true in the admissions process. You could write a spectacular essay, and there'll be some admissions officers that love it and some that just think it's okay. And that's because every person has his or her own experiences and opinions. So that cannot be avoided. Just because you have some readers tell you they didn't connect with your essay does not necessarily mean that you should abandon the essay. At that point, you should consider their rationale. Why did they not like it? Do they have ideas for how you could improve it? And if their rationale makes sense to you and you agree, that's great. And you just gotten a great sense of direction on how you can change your essay. But if the rationale doesn't make sense to you, if you don't agree with it, you have to make sure you stay true to yourself. So don't be afraid not to listen to some of the people giving you feedback or advice. That is perfectly acceptable and normal. So once you are fully satisfied that this is an essay draft you're going to keep and use, we're going to move on to close editing. The first step of close editing is to review every single word in your essay and ask yourself, does that word have to be included? If the answer is no, then you want to cut it out. Now you might ask, but what if I'm not even at my word count? Well, the general rule to good writing is that the more concise you are, the stronger your writing will appear. Concise writing naturally will feel more powerful and have a greater impact. So even if you have not reached your word count, you want to make sure you edit out as much as possible without losing any of the meaning of your essay. Now, at this point, you should take a short break to review Trimming the Fat, which is a worksheet in your handout that gives you a lot of examples of how you can shave words and make your writing a lot leaner and stronger. Secondly, you want to use strong active verbs in your writing. So check your verbs. Instead of want, for example, yearn. Instead of enjoy, revel. So if you have verbs that seem more straightforward or common, think about how you might be able to swap them out for more unique and impactful verbs. Third, you want to avoid repetition at all costs. And this is in sentences. So from one sentence to the next, make sure you don't have any repeated words. Also, from one paragraph to the next, try to make sure you have no repeated ideas. Sometimes, if you look more closely at a paragraph, you'll realize, oh, actually, even though I rephrased it, really I'm talking about the same idea and I'm making the same point, in which case you want to delete one of those sentences. And finally, you want to avoid repeating information across your application. So at this point, you want to actually look outside of just your personal statement and consider your short answers, consider your resume, consider any other supplemental statements that this particular college will be receiving from you. Have you repeated yourself in any way? And if so, how can you revise your statements to avoid doing that? Now, it's also important to avoid overusing adverbs and adjectives. Typically in one sentence, one strong adverb and or adjective will be sufficient. Unless you're writing very poetically, a lot of times putting in too many adjectives and adverbs makes it harder to understand your meaning, and it also weakens the impact of your writing. Finally, you want to make sure that your sentence structure and syntax are varied. Very uniform sentence length and syntax will make your essay feel more boring and dull, whereas if you vary it, you can achieve a much more conversational tone. And at this point, I'd like you to read option 1 and 2 and decide for yourself which one of those paragraphs is stronger, and hopefully you'll see a very substantial difference, and it has to do with the author varying their sentence structure and syntax. And that wraps up our segment on how to write your college personal statement.